Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of the Fireside Chat. This week we are going to be talking about GDPR and personal information on the blockchain and how it affects Gridcoin in particular. And fair warning, this might go over because this is a pretty large topic. The Fireside Chat is a get-together of Gridcoin participants and anyone else who would like to join, held on the Gridcoin Discord server every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, midnight UTC. And we talk anything Gridcoin, anything decentralization, cryptocurrency, blockchain, anything you really want. We have a list of topics, but if you want an episode to cover a specific topic, just reach out and we will do our best to get it scheduled in a timely manner. It is, of course, I always forget this recently, but this is hosted by myself, Jay Ringo, and the Goblin Popper.
Hello.
And in the corner, as always, is I Like Chocolate.
Hey.
So before we get into GDPR, let's cover some news. We don't really have much well, actually we do. We had a release come out. We talked about it a little bit last week, but a release come out last weekend. It was some RPC fixes, a GUI change, and there's one other major change I don't remember, but you can find the release post from Barton26. I will try to remember to link that in the thread below. And there's still work moving forward on the next update. There are a bunch of pull requests that didn't get put into that one, and there's just constant development going on. It's really cool to see. If you want to just lurk around, the best spots to do that are the development channel on Slack or the testnet channel also on Slack. And of course, if you want to help but you don't code, feel free to reach out to Barton about getting on the testnet to help test some new developments and try to break them, have some fun. This is the last week of the CBR poll, which has been going on for 7 weeks now. That's constant block reward, where we are changing the reward mechanism for staking blocks to a constant reward to be determined by the poll. So every time you stake a block, you get X number of GRC. There are 5 options in the poll. You can vote until June 6th. And do remember that you can change your vote at any time during the poll. Your most recent vote is the one that gets counted. And that means that, if the scenario changes or maybe you get more magnitude, you switch some projects up and you want to have higher voting weight, you can vote again. You just go through the same process and your previous vote gets overwritten. The current winning option is an 85-15 split, which would be a 5 Gridcoin block reward. In second place, I'm doing this off from memory right now. So I think second place is 75-25 split, which would be a 10 GRC block reward. And I think the next runner-up might be 65-35, which would be something like a 16 or 17 GRC block reward. You can follow the results on Gridcoin stats, the block explorer put together by Startail, which is an awesome block explorer. Or you can just look in your client under the voting tab and right-click the poll and click view result. So unless anyone has any other Gridcoin-related news from the past week, we'll jump into GDPR, which is sort of related to a news item from the last week. So let's just go into it that way. This is actually pretty important. World Community Grid, because of GDPR, is going through a process where they are bringing themselves up to compliance with the new law. And because of that, we can no longer pull stats freely from their projects. So we can, for the time being, we can't reward GRC for people crunching World Community Grid because we can't get access to your stats. They are working on an agreement. They're drafting an agreement that anyone who wants to draw stats will have to sign, and at the same time, all users will have to opt in to being able to share your stats, your own individual stats, with these people or groups who sign this agreement. And then there's a whole token system, I think, you have to get involved with as the entity, not as the individual. But NeuralMiner is leading the charge with that. We're in contact with WCG. We'll try to keep you up to date as best we can on what happens moving forward. We fully intend, as far as I know, to sign the agreement and bring WCG back into the Gridcoin system, so we can reward for doing work on that. But in the meanwhile, it might be a good move to switch off WCG if you still want to get GRC. Otherwise, stay with WCG because they're a great project that does a lot of great work. And I will link a post or post a link to Neurominer's post about that. So that is, they're doing that because of GDPR, which is I'll let Goblin Popper describe it, but it's a law that was recently put into place in the European Union that its intent is to give individuals more control over their data and how it's used. But Goblin has a bunch more experience than I think any of us here with GDPR. So Goblin, you want to just do a quick overview of what the law is, what it means?
Yeah, sure. So I'm obviously not going to spend a long time explaining GDPR, right?
Oh, hold on. Sorry, before you get going, I'm going to throw a little disclaimer in here because GDPR.
Not legal advice.
Yeah, the GDPR is a very new law data protection is a very new industry. It's a very new legal realm. It's just like when people were trying to legislate the internet in the 90s. It took a lot of work. A lot of things changed over time. And since GDPR is very new, we don't know everything. We're probably going to come away from this with more questions than answers. So definitely keep reading articles and do your own research. But that said, Goblin, what do you got?
Yeah, so I've been studying GDPR for many months now, as actually part of my job, and I will say that it's this is not legal advice. This is just conversational. I'm not going to go into a lot of intricacies. The few that I know, this is going to be very, very high level. So I'm sure some people will be like, he's not being very, that's not exactly what it is. And I understand that, but I want to make sure this is very high level, very easy to understand. But I will say that it is a very weird and convoluted law. And I will say that there are many, many parts of it that legitimately people don't know the answers to because it's not specific in those sections. So I've seen a lot of people argue, and the answer at the end of the day is they'll have to take it to court and there'll have to be precedent on it. So when you see a lot of companies and a lot of organizations like World Community Grid doing certain things that they are, you have to remember that a lot of places that have a lot of money to lose are being overly cautious. And they're being overly cautious because there are a lot of things that they don't know if it is or isn't correct to do. So they have to just go with the good answer, which is just shut everything down to make sure that we don't get fined because we couldn't do anything wrong. But yeah, so two of the major parts that I think really pertain to, or the three major parts that really pertain to the blockchain and what we're talking about today are the right to be forgotten, right of data portability, and just general information consent. The whole concept of GDPR is to effectively give ownership of your data to an individual. What that means is when you walk around, when you create data, right? When you go through sites and you leave data behind you, like your usage information. If you rent a car in Paris and your car choice, how many miles you drove in that car, all that information about you, you kind of leave data behind, right? And so GDPR, the purpose of it is to give ownership of the data that you create to the person who created it, right? Is really the simplest way to sum up all 200 some pages of it. So with consent, you effectively have to have the ability to give and take away consent extremely easily, and you have to be able to give consent and take away consent to specific granular things that you're going to do with the information. So if a company is going to do various things with your information, each one of those items needs a different consent contract. All of it cannot specifically be hidden behind legalese, and it also has to be by default that you're not giving consent. You have to actively give consent to all of these things. So with World Community Grid, they have to effectively stop everything, reach out and say, okay, we don't actively have any consent from any people here. All of you have to now actively give us consent before any of you come on any of this stuff, which is understandable, right? The other thing is, technically speaking, their entire platform at any given time needs to have the ability to do what's called data portability, which is in a human readable format, produce all documentation, all information that is logged about a specific individual. So if someone produces a ton of usage information on World Community Grid, they could turn around tomorrow to the organization and say, I want all of the information you have on me in a document within the next 30 days. And they have to comply and produce that document. And then at the same time, they can say, within the next 30 days, I want you to erase every bit of information that you have on me. And they have to comply, which is a very big undertaking for these kinds of organizations to find every little nook and cranny, every data table that you exist in and completely erase it and give proof that it's erased. And it actually kind of leads into the conversation with blockchain. And this is kind of a can of worms because blockchain's really, really cool because it's an irrefutable ledger, right? But now we're entering the world where there's a law that says if a user, if there's information on this person that exists, they want it gone and you have to erase it. And any of that information stored in a blockchain, you get into this weird situation that I don't know enough about blockchain to really be able to say how that could possibly even happen. But I know that Steam Coin is having issues with that when people say they want posts deleted. And I'm sure that there's a lot of conversation back and forth. But yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what the law is and does. If you don't comply, there's two different fine levels. There's 10 million and 2% of your total global revenue. And then there's 4% or 20 million, whichever is higher. Wow. Of your total growth. Yeah. So, but they take into account what you're doing. So the clip levels are based off of what activity, and they also take into, did you accidentally do it, or are you pretty much telling people go away? No, we don't care about GDPR. We're not erasing your information, right? Like if you blatantly tell them go away and you're not doing it and you fall apart on purpose, the 100% will go after you at 4%, and you'll probably argue it down to like 3 or 2. If you do something wrong in processing or something like that, it's most likely going to be the 2% clip. And remember, that's not what's in the EU. If like Facebook fails and gets a 4% clip level kind of fine, Facebook will be hit with the 4% of global revenue, which means it's not just all their presence in the EU, it's everything globally, worldwide, will be counted towards the 4%. So there's a lot at stake. There was actually a conversation by one of the people from the commission that oversees it. I forget the name of where the woman worked. But she all the small businesses are freaking out. So that she went on a talk show and pretty much said, hey guys, like, anyone, like all the small businesses, please stop worrying. We don't really care about you. We're going after like mid to large size businesses, which is understandable. But realistically speaking, and any lawyer will tell you this, unless you have that in writing, or it's written in the law itself, that there's a clip level with your finances where you actually matter, nobody's going to believe it. Everyone's going to still have to try and be compliant.
Well, let me give you a little context to this. So GDPR was started development in about 2013, and it was passed in 2016. So this is before, 2013 was the first Bitcoin bubble, and 2016 was before the second one. So it seems like, and based on those numbers of that fine level, it seems like that is what you just said is accurate. Like this is a law that it has good intention. It's meant to make it so companies like Facebook can't do the Cambridge Analytica sort of stuff. Like it's meant to deal with large corporations and how they handle individuals' data, and it doesn't seem like it was really considering the blockchain at all as a technology.
No, not really. It's like the easiest way to whenever you're like, okay, like you reading the preamble gives you the basic idea of like why they wrote it, and effectively it goes back to they're trying to establish data and right to your data as like a kind of a basic human right. And I know that seems kind of weird and over exaggeration, but if you create it, you own it, right? And so if I create the idea of me on a website, if I put this information on Facebook and say, yeah, like here's my birthday and here's all the colors I like and here's all the politicians I want to follow and all that garbage. At any time, Facebook's just collecting that, right? And GDPR says, yeah, they can collect that. That's fine because you put it out there and you said that's fine, use it. But at any time you say, I want you to give all that back, they have to. And at any time you have to say, you know, I want you to erase all of that, they have to. And the most interesting part is, at any point, if you say, I don't give you the right to stalk me or collect any information on me, I don't give you the right, no, it's like if you don't give them the right to anything, they're not allowed to actually discriminate against you as an individual customer, right? So if they say, if you go to Facebook and you're like, you're not allowed to take any information or track me in any way other than what basic information I put on here, because obviously, you know, you're putting your name, you have to fill out some information to actually make an account. But you're like, don't track me, don't monitor my clicks, nothing. They can't treat you any differently. They can't say that you have to pay a fine or you have to pay a fee, or they can't incentivize you to give them consent. That is illegal. So it's this fun situation, yeah. But there's obviously no idea or no like concept of blockchain was thought about in this irrefutable ledger kind of thing, right? It really puts a real big damper on the blockchain market.
Well,
and it just in terms of like now people are afraid, right? What if something gets
there's
in
a lot of
there?
fear.
Yeah, it's not saying like blockchain's gone, right? This is saying what happens if I accidentally for example, the best way to probably handle the blockchain with GDPR would be to say I make an internal ID number that references all of this external customer data, right? All the real stuff, all the churning, all the information we build internally is in the blockchain, right? With this ID, which references the customer information in a different table externally, right?
Right, off-chain storage.
Yeah, because then if I delete it externally, that ID means nothing to anyone, right? However, right, what if there's a data leak and that ID is now known to everyone? Well, then forever will that person's information be tied to that ID, right? So you have these situations where they could probably make it work, but a basic data leak would destroy them utterly, because a data leak at that size and scope would wholeheartedly reach the 4% clip level.
So to douse the fear a little bit, I mean, first of all, GDPR sounds like the blockchain, like what the blockchain is meant to do. The blockchain is here to give us ownership of our data back. There are a whole bunch of projects that are working to make it so that individuals are paid for leasing out their data to advertisers, to social media platforms, and that sort of stuff. So they sort of align in that respect. They're trying to do the same thing. And a lot of major companies that are looking into blockchain tech have said that, and they've come out. IBM is actually a great example. They released a paper. They released a paper May 8th, beginning of May sometime, that detailed basically saying to the European Union, look, there's a way to merge the blockchain with GDPR. So I personally would expect another law to come out that sort of does that. This GDPR was a little premature, but there are ways to make blockchain infrastructure as it exists to work in compliance with GDPR with off-chain data storage, like Goblin was just talking about. But because there are these major companies doing this, working with blockchain now, IBM, Intel, governments, full governments are working with this stuff. They're not out to kill blockchain. It's just GDPR was initiated a long time ago, and it was put into place before everyone knew that there was so much interest in blockchain tech, and it was now everyone is either scared or trying to make themselves compliant in the meanwhile, or while a new sort of legal structure gets put together that incorporates blockchain tech.
Yeah, because you also have to remember GDPR affects the EU, but it kind of affects everyone else as well. Because so GDPR gives ownership of data to all people physically in the EU, right? Very specific on the wording. And so if someone in the EU visits a website for Joey's Tire Shop, right, in like Alabama, his website might be tracking that person. That person has the legal right to call that tire shop and say, you have to delete the information I just created on your site. I'm not joking, right? That's the extent of what GDPR does. And when you think about it, like, well, how does someone in the EU possibly sue someone in the US? It's like, well, technically that's supposed to be handled via trade agreements and a bunch of like country level legal jargon back and forth. But yes, that's why everyone in the US is starting to implement IP blockers, which is saying, if you're in the EU, don't come to my website, you're just fully blocked. Right. You know, that's actually what a lot of people are doing. It's like, they just have a filter that scans it checks for if you're an EU based IP address. If it finds your IP address is from the EU, it'll just outright block you from the content.
Right, and that's that's one solution a bunch of blockchains have been talking about, just block EU participants from the blockchain. And that's a reason I think GDPR is going to evolve into something a little more reasonable with blockchain, or a little more incorporates blockchain a little more, because blockchain is a giant tech that is going to be involved in a lot of stuff. Maybe cryptocurrencies are a different realm, but blockchain is the tech. And
yeah, there's things for blockchain to be used for. You just have to be very careful when it's anything that can identify directly or indirectly a person, like biometrics information, right? Eye color, address, obviously, like blood type, like their name, social security, anything that could identify them directly or indirectly cannot exist on that in its current form. Right? A blockchain that might have some kind of major key system where it could potentially delete everything prior or alter that information or something like that. I imagine that's kind of where, like, I think blockchain has to meet GDPR halfway, to be completely honest, because the US, GDPR isn't like the end all be all for regulations, right? It's actually the beginning. There are more regulations coming out, right? There will be, I can guarantee it. And the U.S. is probably one of the next ones in line to release a pretty decently sized one.
This is speculation at this point, but I don't think many people are going to copy GDPR. Last time something like this happened on this sort of scale with a new tech coming out was the stock market. When the first stock markets, like trading houses, came out, London banned issuance of stocks, and that created New York City as we know it today. Like, London lost a huge benefit of this new way to fund companies because they were essentially ICO scams. I mean, share issuance scams. Very similar to what's going on now with ICOs. But I don't think they're going to repeat that mistake. And I don't think a lot of other nations are going to make the same mistake, because this tech is here to stay.
Yeah, but you have to remember, sorry, Chocolate. But you have to remember, it's like a lot of people are seeing this as I'm gaining. It's technically adding to my personal freedom. If you look at it if you look at it from a corporate level, it's a nightmare. If you look at it from an individual person's level, it's actually technically almost like gaining more rights. I have the right to call up any company I want and tell them to literally just delete everything they have on me. They're no longer legal. Like, if they send me spam email and I didn't consent to that, I can sue them, right? Which sounds, what was it?
Ultimately, it feels like the blockchain. Like I said, it's doing good stuff, like data rights. You right to your own data. That is an awesome thing. But the blockchain is also doing it through a different path. One's regulation, one's technology. And generally, technology wins out. It sometimes takes some time, and sometimes things go badly before it wins out. But technological solutions, in my experience and my study, is generally are better and win over regulatory solutions?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things that blockchain could probably be used for is probably consent management. If we really had to like tie the two together and how they could play nice, like having an irrefutable ledger of when someone gave consent, of what they gave consent, and during what time periods that consent was given before it was removed, probably is the biggest thing it could do. Because you could never say, like, you have to contain you have to keep some information that is required for processing. So for example, if I, as an organization, like say I'm running a server, right? And a bunch of people were blocked on that server because they're bad, they're not nice, or I need to just block them for whatever reason, right? Oh yeah, right, yeah. But yeah, so I have to block them for whatever reason. I need the ability to contain their IP address to keep them blocked, even if they ask me to release and delete all their information, because that's a requirement to do my job. So like there are things that will never be deleted that the blockchain could store. You just have to be very careful and categorize information very specifically as to what can be stored and what we're not sure can be stored, which means we probably shouldn't store it at all, because you can't go back once you start. But yeah, chocolate, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, in response to what Jay Ringo said earlier about not making the same mistakes. So Jay Ringo, were you claiming that a massive nation state wouldn't repeat a mistake?
Fair point.
I like that leading question. That's great.
But the other point I wanted to make was, I think, given the fact that I'm not anywhere close to being able to build a blockchain, I guess I'll just say it. But I had this idea of, not that I'm very big on advertising or consumerism, but since it does seem that our individual data is creating wealth, and ideally, if that wealth is created with consent, that the person creating the wealth should receive some of it, and the people have talked about this before. If you give them data, you should get paid for the data. Blah blah blah. And so I was wondering, well, can you do this with the blockchain? And it would be a bit complicated, but basically, you could have you could fill out all of your information into like this node, right? And you are that node, and you're hashed, and you're completely anonymous. But all of that, all of your personal information, is kept there, and along with voluntarily any information you want to give about what websites you visit and what things you buy, and companies could and basically you could see online advertisements as a function of this blockchain, right? So this blockchain allocates, automatically distributes, very very similar to how let's say like Google distributes ads. This blockchain could find a mechanism to distribute ads to the most relevant ads to the people who want to see them the most, who might actually benefit from them on a completely voluntary basis. So I think blockchain can actually solve a lot of these issues. Can't solve all of them, of course, but I do think that there's room.
Blockchain solves everything.
Yeah, so actually, well, I was thinking about this while you guys were talking, and correct me, I know this isn't how blockchain normally works, but entertain the idea of, I don't know if it can't work like this. Is it possible for people to pretty much say that there are certain blocks that it's like all of my information is compartmentalized on one block, and that you as an individual own that block? Is that I know, because I mean all the blocks are kind of strung together, so I feel like that's not really blockchain I'm describing. But is there any? Yeah, I didn't think so. No. But that's.
Well.
Yeah.
That's. Go ahead, Chocolate.
I was gonna say, if you want to get, so it doesn't exist right now. Yeah, definitely not. But in the future, when people really start playing with blockchains, it might be possible. So we've talked about this earlier about incentive structures in blockchains, and I think one of the most powerful aspects of the blockchain is that you can choose how resources are allocated and how resources are created in relation to what. So it's a very powerful tool in that way. And so can we in the future say, okay, Barton, so that'd be removing like a block from the bottom of the Jenga tower. Okay, but could, for example, your block be so I can't think of ways right now, but and it might not even be possible to do exactly what you're saying, Goblin, but to have the same effect as what you're saying, which is, okay, I gave this information voluntarily, I now want to retract it, and it's completely mine, and it can't be used by anyone else. I do think that would somehow be possible with the blockchain. I mean, it would require a lot of serious thought, and the person who comes up with it, or the team that comes up with it, could probably make a lot of money, or just liberate humanity in other ways.
Yeah, it sounds like a block web, I think, is the best way, because really, you can't take a block out of the middle of a blockchain without the whole thing kind of crumbling or losing its purpose, right? Otherwise, it's no longer a chain. It's just a bunch of compartmentalized information chunks, right? Which is kind of pointless. You might as well just store it in a database. The ledger needs to be
owned by everyone.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like I feel like it's almost like a block web where everyone has a required part of a blockchain and then contains their own information.
So it
would be an interesting thought experiment. I don't know.
Yeah, the solution that people are talking. First, I think Chocolate's right. There's going to be a lot of development in this field of blockchain tech in terms of privatizing your data and not putting personal information on the blockchain. Because, I mean, from a personal perspective, that sounds like a bad thing, putting all your personal information on a blockchain that will never get deleted. But before that happens, what people are talking about is how to make it encrypted. So there's the concept of, if you throw away your private key, your information could still be on the blockchain, but it's more or less gibberish, so no one can read it. Does that count for GDPR compliance? Or they're trying to figure out ways to do the off-chain storage, which is sort of kind of like what Gridcoin does, but we'll get to that in a second. And then hashing the link to that off-chain storage. But before, I think we should move into how this relates to Gridcoin pretty soon. But if there was one question in the chat, I want to talk about really quick. Right, Robster asked, how and who could the EU fine if blockchains don't make changes? So the way I understand it, and Goblin, you definitely know more than me on this, is that GDPR is about companies and entities who collect and process personal information. So as many blockchains are not either of those two things, so it would be difficult for them to fine a blockchain. But it's like this law was targeted written thinking about companies like Facebook and Google and Apple and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the law specifically, GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, right? The general in that acronym literally refers to the fact that it covers everything, pretty much everything, but specifically says that you don't really need to comply if you're running like something out of your, like a household project, like you're not really making money. Like if I was running a server and just being like, yeah, this is for my friends, I don't have to comply, right? But as soon as I start making money or it starts becoming more notable and more people are on it, then I have to, regardless of sector or whatever. But
I think that's the big part. Once you start making money part.
Once you start making money and it starts but nonprofits can technically be hit. I believe so.
They make money.
They make money. Yeah, they make. I don't think it specifies money. It really only says not people who really do things like hobbyists is kind of the only specification. But you could definitely legally argue like he's not making money. This is a hobby for him, because how else would you define a hobby? As soon as you start making money off a hobby, it's a job. But anyway, so it's not about the regulators finding any of it. It's about like people reporting it. So someone only is going to get a fine if a specific user comes back and says, Facebook was a big meanie head and I demand you fine him for this reason, and you submit a formal complaint. The first actual major fine happened 42 minutes after the law was passed. And it was $8.8 million towards Facebook. So yeah, it's yeah, right. Oh yeah, and to be clear, the law was passed. I should use better terminology. The law was passed in late April 2016. There was a grace, and this is why I'm actually kind of, to be honest, a little annoyed at IBM/World Community Grid. It was passed in 2016, in April 2016, and given this much time until literally earlier until Friday last week, for a grace period for people to actually become compliant. So when someone literally is like, oh, we have to remove all this consent, you had 2 years to get consent from individuals in ramping up. And like, so for all the emailers, that's why all the people sending out privacy policies, all the people resending out consent forms saying, hey, if you still want our emails, click this link because I can't technically send you an email after today unless you click that link, right? So they had 2 years to do that, and so it gets a little frustrating when people not necessarily miss the deadline, but just are like, don't have a plan ready. Yeah, everyone, the amount of emails I got that day. But anyway, yeah, so it has to, you don't have to worry about the actual technology. You have to worry about someone reporting someone using that technology in their business improperly. So when someone says delete all my information, a company pretty much says, all right, we did. And you have to have proof internally, so effectively you'd have a log file showing the commands if you were legally required to, like, if they demanded proof, they'd effectively show commands, be like, yeah, here's the log file that says you were deleted. And with a blockchain, you could say, delete all my information. Well, there's really no log you can show that proves that it was removed from the blockchain because there's no real way to get it out of the blockchain. So you run into this situation where if someone came up to a company using blockchain and said, delete all my information, and your response was, I can't, that's a problem. And that's when the fine would start happening.
Well,
also, if anyone has, sorry, chocolate coffee.
Well, I had a couple of things I actually wanted to. Well, my question to you was going to be, how do you find a blockchain? But
you're finding the company, not the blockchain.
Right. Okay. So what this does is it puts a roadblock in the way of making a organization based around a blockchain, because that organization then needs to comply with GDPR practices, and that would be the target of GDPR.
Well, I mean, but a blockchain is completely voluntary.
Yes, but it hinders the adoption only because when you go to adopt it, you have to be like, okay, what information are we putting on the blockchain? And it can't be anything related to any person ever in the EU. So, you know what I mean? Like, if you put any information about any individuals or any metrics about that individual, you do analytics about that person and put it on the blockchain, you generate new statistics about that person, put it on the blockchain, then it becomes a problem. If you have it for internal purposes, that's okay, but it can't contain any information, including about employees, right? Because they're people in the EU too. So it's like, at that point, what do you really put on it that gives you value? So it hinders the adoption rate, I would say.
So I'm wondering about that, and so, okay, I mean, so let's say something gets posted on Steemit and they want to take it down and blah 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 blah. And you have to do a fork for every person who wants their information off of it. Well, how do you go? Let's say, I mean, this wouldn't be a problem in Gridcoin, right? Because we don't, we don't have that kind of personal information. But let's just say it was for a second.
It is.
It is? Okay. Well,
yeah, so a CPI.
Hold on.
Okay, sorry.
Let him finish the question.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, how do you who are you going to come up to in Gridcoin and be like, yo, you're gonna start forking out right now, So, we're gonna start posting on Steemit, and Vortag is going to have to upvote all of our posts until we get the money we owe.
Here's an important distinction to make in what you're talking about. Steem is a blockchain. Steemit is a company. I think they're based out of Italy. So Steemit can be attacked, but Steem, the blockchain, cannot. That, in a way that we understand or know, there may be a way to do it in the future, but for now, that's the way I see it, at least. Yeah,
and it's regarding the Gridcoin. I'm not saying that Gridcoin's like capable of being fined. I don't know enough about the intricacies of what would define a finable entity, right? Because technically it depends where we're based out of. If we're based out of like US, technically speaking, they would have to come and fine us, which you could pretty much taunt them and say, yeah, go ahead, send us over a fine. I'm not going to pay it. And there would be this fun little battle of, no, you have to pay it, and us saying, well, then come over the water and fight me on it, which I'll never do. So, but realistically, it's like if there's any information in the Gridcoin blockchain that indirectly identifies an individual, so if a CPID could be tied to a user by their name or like by their internet pseudonym or their handle, and then you could eventually probably tie that back to who their actual person is. It doesn't really necessarily matter how many steps you'd have to take to identify that person. It could technically lead back to them. I'm not saying that.
I think I'm not so sure that's quite right, because there is the concept in the GDPR of anonymization. And
it hits that gray zone.
Yeah, there's a different set of rules for data that is non-attributable, meaning that if it requires a correlating table, meaning a lookup table to correlate a piece of information with an individual, there are looser rules around it in the GDPR. You know, and I haven't gone through Chapter 11 and all those different things. It's crazy, but the rules do appear to be looser around information that has been anonymized or pseudo-anonymized.
Yeah, because you're at least trying to protect it, and that's why I'm saying I'm not exactly sure if we would even be finable if that information got out, or like if that's identifiable. But the point being is that it could indirectly be tied. So it's one of those, and this goes back to why companies are being overprotective, right? Could you legally argue in a court of law that no, there's not a 100% chance that I'm not at fault? No, maybe like 80%, but do you want to take that risk with $20 million on the line? Probably not, right? So it's that's kind of what it is. It's I don't know if the Gridcoin blockchain is technically compliant, but I don't technically think we have
What's let's talk about the data that is stored on the Gridcoin blockchain. So the basic data is transaction information, the base blockchain ledger. That is not personal information. It's just transaction data from one wallet to another. And then our secondary data, which makes us a unique blockchain, is the CPID, the magnitude, essentially. The part of the blockchain that ties a wallet address, someone correct me if I butcher this, that ties a wallet address to the amount that address contributes to external projects that require processing. So that happens in our superblock system with mechanisms involved. But right now with BOINC, that's just the CPID. As we get other entities that we can contribute to, it's whatever they choose to make the identifier for their contributors, whatever they choose. So with the CPID, we have that information on the blockchain. So you can take that information and then you can go to BOINC projects, and from that BOINC project, you can more or less identify an individual. So the question that Jim and Goblin were just talking about is that step, does that requiring that step comply with GDPR? And it's more or less unknown at this point, because like we said at the beginning, there is a very new law and there has to be precedent set for it. It has to be argued in the court of law. And there are clauses in the GDPR that talk about anonymization, they talk about encryption, and how you can have a process like ours and make it compliant. But the question is ours compliant right now? And if not, how do we make it? And I think the answer is just who knows?
I think that's right. I think it's in the gray area. I mean, we're certainly better off than if we were really putting PII in the super blocks, right? Literally. I mean, I think we're a heck of a lot better off.
PII is
personal identifiable information. That's the older term that those of us who have been around a long time used to use for it. But it's basically when you put someone's name or username or something that literally is directly attributed to them, all bets are off. I mean, you've tagged it to that person. We're we're one step removed from that, right? We require a lookup. You would have to do a lookup of a CPID against some other source of information, some other table to be able to figure out who it is.
Which is why Boeing projects want to. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think it still is right to think of it as gray. It's not. It has not been settled yet. It's just we're not literally in the wrong. Or crossing the law.
And I think if it was decided, or like if some court case, I can almost guarantee it's not going to be us, right? Who's going to like come tomorrow and like be like, I'm going to sue Gridcoin, right? It's like, not saying that it would be us to decide this in that court battle, but if it was decided that it's like, oh, you need to be more removed than that, that also gets into a weird zone of like, okay, well, we're open source, right? Which means we provide all our information. So we would have to take some of that information that would connect it to people, and we'd have to give it to someone in our organization or, quote, organization that would effectively have to encrypt that and store that and be responsible for that. And then we get into a really weird world if that is actually told that that's what we have to do, right? If that makes sense?
It's antithetical to the whole idea that we're, of decentralization.
Yeah, which is really the other pain, right? Is all the information that we're creating on the blockchain, right? If it's deemed to be even worse, and they're like, listen, someone could figure out who that is because the computer information is on that, or like someone uses WooProp, and then they say after using WooProp that collects all that usage information, they don't want that actually even on there anymore. They retract it. You start getting this weird world of, right? If you agree to use our service, you have to forfeit your rights of retraction, because we exist in a blockchain and that is not allowable. It's not like computationally capable of happening, right? And you can't really you can't tell someone they're not allowed to do that. So you get in this really weird world of what ifs and fun stuff.
So here's some interesting observations that I have on. I of course am a WCG contributor and have been for many, many years, since 2006, I think, which is when the thing started. We're pretty close to it. But when this whole thing broke and when GDPR was activated, and I looked at the they provided a new privacy notice with language in there, and it was interesting. They almost seemed to imply that if you opt out, that they would still provide certain summary information, but not with the username and other types of user information, even if you opted out, which implies that IBM has at least considered this notion of two different levels of data. The issue is that it's not in line with what they've done on the API, meaning that the API provides information that, quite frankly, they probably shouldn't by default, right? Because they're providing fields in that export that probably people that consume the statistics don't really need, and then they've put this ultra conservative token in place. So it's a little bit weird. It's almost like it's a little bit discombobulated, the approach they've taken.
Yeah, you also have to remember, for anyone also wondering what Jim's kind of mentioning, is also remember that you have to remove any information that a person gives you, but if you internally extrapolated information that like they didn't directly give you, it also kind of falls into that gray zone of whether or not I have to delete. So usage information doesn't necessarily have to be deleted, but the information that the person provided to you, such as their PII, the personal identifiable information, or some of those key metrics around them that might fall into that category, that does have to be deleted. So this kind of goes to my initial comment on the gray zone. There's a lot of gray zone, and it's really depressing, and it's the reason why a lot of companies are just flipping out and just doing regional blocks, because it's safer to wait for the court battles to just be decided and then come in after the fact.
Well, you don't like gray things?
No, I hate gray things. Gray's,
yeah. Anonymous, I feel like you were trying to chime in earlier.
I was, yeah. Just a question. Basically, in the wallet, I believe we have a link to the Gridcoin Block Explorer, and basically the chatter, I felt like it was kind of going in the direction of like, if you provide a link to a database which you can associate to our CPIDs and whatnot, that might be an issue. So the question is basically, could it be an issue, the fact that we have a link to the Block Explorer in the wallet?
Yeah, I think it might. And I think we may have to do the unfortunate step of stripping the usernames out of the Block Explorer, and then people are going to have to correlate their own CPIDs if they want to.
Well,
I don't. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's not. Yeah, it's just because it's in the wallet. I think a Block Explorer in itself is fine. Like, go to Gridcoin stats. That's some other entity. I just think the fact that it was in the wallet might be a point of concern.
I get it. I see what you're saying. Yeah, and Gridcoin Stats is going to have to worry about their own issues related to this stuff. So,
and just as an aside, right, before I forget, for any super specific questions, right? I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I just spent a lot of time reading this stuff, and same to probably Jim, right? Jim just spent a lot of time reading this stuff, but what you can do if we have very specific questions before we move forward about certain things, every single country in the EU has email addresses you can email with questions about GDPR. Like, if you're like, hey, I don't know how this is supposed to affect me. I don't know how dual citizenship is supposed to work. I like, does this fall under it as a citizen, or as someone who might be affected by it? I want this answered. It takes probably like a week or so to get response because they're kind of swamped, but you can take their answer as some level of authority. So if we walk up and we're like, hey, we do a nonprofit like blockchain for scientific research and such, we might have some information on the blockchain. Where do we fall? What level of removal do we have to have? They might not be able to give an answer if it's not really decided, but they can definitely direct us in some form, right? So just to know that anyone who's really has any question who might exist in the EU or outside, you can always email that resource, and not me. But you can hire me. You just, you have to hire me before I answer the questions.
All right. I mean, does anyone have any other questions or comments about GDPR, how Gridcoin is affected by this or could be? I want to stress that how this interacts with blockchain is really is gray still. It's more gray than how it affects companies like Facebook, Google, and Apple, because I really think that's the companies they were thinking about when they built this stuff. And new precedents and law will come out with the blockchain. But does anyone have any general insights or questions or comments?
I'm honestly just excited to see how this regulation pushes blockchain's development, because there are going to be a lot of major organizations that, as we mentioned, don't want to touch it until there are certain features that are added to it. So I think this will definitely push a little bit of the proprietary add-ons to blockchain. But I'm just really excited to see how blockchain develops over the next probably 6 months to a year. I think it's going to develop significantly in a bunch of directions to kind of help meet with this regulation.
Same. I think it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, and this is it's weird to say, but restrictions, even if they seem bad, are generally a good thing in the development of something, because they force you to change and they force you to evolve and make something better. Because I think a lot of us would agree that having personal information on a blockchain is not the best thing in the world, but it wasn't really anything people were thinking about for, as a top priority. The people were just throwing out blockchains and making all these really cool use cases without thinking of perhaps the long-term effects of what is happening. So that just is an added thought to what Goblin said.
Is anyone here? I know a couple people here are based in Europe, and for some reason are still awake. God bless you guys. But has anyone had any fun run-ins with it yet, or any experiences with it, or anything like that?
Has your company been sued $20 million yet?
Now, the highest one I've heard of thus far has been 8.8 million, which again took 43 minutes to be processed, which is just stupid.
I bet they were just itching to push the button on that one.
Apparently,
Facebook, let's get 'em.
I'm pretty sure like it was one guy who pretty much had everything pre-written, and he sent it, and it probably took 43 minutes for them to like register the email was sent.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a bunch of. Just look up like Facebook fined for GDPR, and it'll be like the first thing to pop up.
Like going back to like the Steemit versus Gridcoin thing, like, so Jamie, when you said Steemit has like is a company and Steem is a blockchain, so that's exactly the point I was getting to. Is that Steemit, the website has a like human beings, real life human beings that can be put into prison if they don't like listen to the governments that are telling them what to do. Whereas Gridcoin is a decentralized network. I mean, really, Bitcoin would be even a better example. Or even actually, yeah, because no one really has like the ability to make like serious forks in Bitcoin without a large enough following. So how would you?
What, Bitcoin Gold isn't serious? Sorry.
How would you go to like Bitcoin and say, listen, you bastards, pay up? How would you go to Ethereum even? I mean, Ethereum's a bit more complicated, okay, because it's a bit more centralized, but even so, I'm just not completely convinced that these kinds of regulations will suffice to protect people's privacy on the blockchain. That's kind of hits on two notes. One, should it, how much power do we want to give to these companies, or sorry, not companies, to these countries that are regulating? And the second question is, do we want to self-regulate? And I realize not in the traditional, U.S. Business sense of, let's just let everybody self-regulate, but we want our data protected, right? I mean, and then we have control over our own blockchain. So can't we come up with solutions to our own problems?
Yeah, twofold answer to that, and it's not an answer; it's just thoughts. I think you're right in that it's difficult to prosecute a network. Especially an open source network without a central authority. I think with Bitcoin, you can target, if you were a government, you can target organizations that support and develop Bitcoin code, and you can take their money away, and then the development of Bitcoin will be significantly stalled. It will go back to 2008 levels of development, where it was just like 6 guys in a shed. But it's not like Steemit, where you can literally go after the Steemit Incorporated company. But on the other level of the self-regulation part, I'll go back to what I said before. I think GDPR and blockchain are essentially the same intention, which is to give the power of data to more people than just these central authorities. With Bitcoin in particular, it has to do with currency, the data involved with minting currency and keeping track of currency and auditing transactions. That Bitcoin sought to decentralize that, to give it more people. So now there are a bunch of other blockchains that are seeking to do the same thing, except with personal data, to instead of Facebook owning it or Google owning it or Apple owning it, the individual owns it, and he decentralizes that ownership. So I don't think they're fighting each other necessarily. I think they're going to find a way to work together, the regulation and the technology, because they're essentially the same thing.
Sorry, Chip, you go.
No, it really comes down to essentially a tension point between the concept of private data and public data, right? What data should a person be able to exert control over and have a reasonable expectation of being private or being able to keep it private, and what things belong on as publicly discoverable in a immutable blockchain that's basically decentralized and not subject to tampering. That's the real question, and I think it hasn't. I don't think it's been sorted out yet. I think that we're still sort of in the exploration stage of the interface between those two domains, and it's going to be interesting. So that's my thought on it. I think
Yeah,
it's
and I
just,
don't think
Yeah, and chocolate. I mean, you're totally right. Like, how are they going to walk up and find someone? You're right. There's a lot of argument right now, and I spoke to one of my friends about this who works at a smaller company as well, and I was like, hey, are you guys GDPR compliant yet? You know, like a couple months ago, and he goes, I don't know, we're not really worrying about it. And I was like, well, technically, your website and you should be, and he was like, yeah, okay, but you know, and like, yes, but in the most realistic sense, his comment was, who's gonna find me? And it's like, well, if you have any presence or any representative in the EU, they hand it to them. Otherwise, you kind of just get a letter in the mail or whatever, however they do it. It's like, okay, but who's gonna make me, right? Like, who's gonna make me do it? And the answer is, the whole finding process is there are people set up to do the finding, and there's a process to do the finding. But like, yeah, like with Gridcoin or with a decentralized network of people, what are they going to hand it to like 4 of us and say you're responsible, right? That makes no sense, right? So there is really no system in place to really find a decentralized group of people who are just doing something on their spare time, right?
And
we don't really have revenue, so I don't even know if we technically fall under it. Right? I really don't. So.
And I don't think they would. I really think they're building this around larger entities, and that's their target. And then they expand the law based on that. Think back to like telecommunications laws that were put in place in the 80s. They were put in place to target, what was it, AT&T?
yeah.
And that's all they did. There were smaller companies, but they targeted AT&T, made them break up into smaller bell corps, and then the law evolved to fit that model instead of the direct attack on the one large institution.
I don't think decentralized blockchains that are decentralized like Gridcoin are really going to be the target of regulators. I don't think we're the least bit interesting to them. I think, look, that's a practical argument, not a legal one, because as was said earlier in this discussion, from a purely legal point of view, there's no line that's there. But practically speaking, I think there is. And, you know, Gridcoin's just not going to be interesting to the regulators. Could Steemit be interesting? Maybe a little bit more. Because, I mean, literally, the story on the blockchain, stuff that's personal and identifiable and everything else, and there's an entity they go after. Are they going to be as interested in Steemit as they are in the activities of Facebook and Google and all the other folks that probably are storing so much data about us, they know more about us than we know about ourselves? Well, that's an interesting question, right? They are going to go after those guys. And I think
it's not to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I mean, it's not to say I agree with you, but that's not to say we shouldn't be thinking about this stuff moving forward. Like Anonymous' comment earlier, I think that's something we need to consider. And because eventually it will get to the point where they're looking at they're casting a wider net. But I agree with you that it's like not now, not anytime soon, maybe years down the road once precedent gets set and the details are hammered out in a court of law.
And even then, I mean, realistically, they're just so swamped right now with the initial flood of people saying, I've been wanting to find this jerk forever. Now I finally can for some arbitrary reason. Like, the reason that they're not going to be interested in any small fries who don't have any revenue or like the idea of them as a corporation or as an entity is probably shaky at best, because the amount of things that they're probably worrying about right now to just get fines from the major organizations, they're just swamped, right? But actually, and I think this probably needs to be edited in a little bit earlier, but we never really explained, and I know Barton probably does the best job explaining it, like the Steemit post thing where people were requesting posts removed from Steemit and how that was handled and how like you can't really get everything off. I don't know because I know we kind of glazed over that, but I feel like it's.
I think I sort of touched on the same concept where the idea is you throw away your private key, so the information is technically still there, but no one has access to it. So the way Steemit does it, I think, is they throw away the reference to the data. The data is still there, but no one can really find it, I think.
Yeah, I mean that would make sense. One of the things I think we were talking about in Slack was, if you, I'm being very fuzzy about this, but if you threw away the decryption key to the data's still there, or is it deleted? That's going to be something that I think is going to be the fine point of probably the solution for this in practical terms, right? You're not going to literally be able to erase the data; it's still there in the blockchain, but somehow you've accomplished the objective of being unable to read it for all intents and purposes, and then basically it's gone.
I think that'd be actually really interesting if like precedent was set that pretty much said, like, you as an individual, you own the key. It's like a lockbox in a bank, right?
Lockbox.
It's a lockbox in a bank where no one else has access to it. You own it. It's yours, but you can't take the lockbox home, right? You can destroy the key and no one will ever get it ever again, or you could just take the key home with you to make sure that no one ever touches it. So your information might be heavily encrypted on the blockchain, but if you're the one who controls the key, it's almost like deleting it in a logical sense, because it's useless garbage when it's that heavily encrypted. So I feel like that'd be a very interesting case, but the real question is, who wants to go and fight a legal battle to kind of get that set, right? Because it's not like arguing and having someone say, yes, that's okay. It's you doing it, someone disagreeing with you, and eventually fighting a long legal battle to get it approved or not, which is, fun.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think encryption is going to be an interesting way to approach GDPR and compliance on blockchain. And I think people are already starting to look into it, because that's what blockchain is.
I mean, they're definitely looking into encryption, but I don't know if I said this earlier, but it's really sad because it wasn't written. None of these laws, regardless, like US or otherwise, none of these laws are written by technical people, right? There was a law that was recently released in the US called, like, was it 23 NYCRR 500? Yeah, it has a really sexy name, I know. And it's this short law about, like, how to store and process data in New York, right? It's only like 10 pages, right? And it's like, it doesn't even say what kind of encryption you need. It just says the best encryption there currently is, right? Why? Because nobody today who wrote that law has any knowledge about computer science or computers. They're just like, yeah, encryption, I know what that word means. What encryption should you use? The best. Was there a minimum? No, just like the best.
The best.
Stuff, right? Like, that's the best qualification they can provide on this kind of software, right? And this kind of solution. It's the same with GDPR. It's not written by technical people. They don't know what to put in. They're just writing down things that sound good, right? And that's I think is the biggest problem with the technical laws. And the biggest problem that's going to be with GDPR and any law that comes after it is none of these people are technical.
Are you telling me there's a lack of technical knowledge in politics?
I'm saying there's a lot of lack of technical knowledge in a lot of places, including politics. And it makes these laws very depressing, very, very depressing. Because they had no idea the amount of work that was required to do data, like portability, like to collect all that information. When you have, like, massive databases, well, it's interconnected tables, and they're like, yeah, that should be like just do the thing. You click the button, make it happen, right? That's pretty much what the bunch of lawyers and like politicians are thinking when they're writing this stuff. They have no idea. So.
Yep, that is just a direct shot of confidence in governments right there. Get involved in politics, folks. Bring your technical knowledge.
I'm just gonna let's elect Jim. I vote Jim. We'll elect Jim. Jim's gonna push through the next GDPR, and there's gonna be a little tiny like a little clause in there that says, like, all laws, like, Gridcoin is ignored by all laws.
Oh man! All right, let's wrap this up. We're a little over an hour here. Does anyone have any closing comments they want to throw down?
Good talk, guys. That was really good. Very productive.
Yeah, I learned a lot. Thank you, Goblin, for really breaking it down here. But yeah, GDPR, moral of the story, GDPR is a new thing. It's evolving, and we should just continue to pay attention to how it evolves, especially in relation to the blockchain, and what we can do as we continue to develop the code to try to make it easier in the future to become compliant with whatever they change it into, or whatever precedents they set. Yeah, and continue reading. Again, we are not experts on this stuff. There are great articles out there. I linked to an IBM paper about GDPR blockchain and what they're thinking of doing.
I literally had an argument a month ago with a legal department of a major organization, and it was just painful because they don't just trust them because they're IBM. Don't just trust them because they're a major organization. I've had legitimate arguments where I'm like, you didn't read all of it, and they went away and refused to answer my email responses because it was like, oh, he's actually right. So don't just trust IBM, like read a bunch of sources and even read it yourself if you want, but yeah.
Excellent wisdom. So we will be wrapping this up then on that. Thanks everyone for coming and participating in the conversation. I don't know what we're doing next week, but we got a list of topics. We will pull one off that list and get a post up next week. I will hopefully have this one edited sooner than last one. Yeah, we'll see you at the Fireside Chat next Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, Gridcoin Discord server. And do not forget to vote on the CBR proposal that ends next Wednesday, June 6th. Have a great weekend, everyone.